What does tribalism look like? Kids chanting a football song? Religious groups making race-based slurs? Banging drums and singing ancient songs? A kid in a MAGA hat? What does tribalism look like? At the close of the March for Life in Washington, D.C. on Friday, there were three groups of people at the Lincoln Memorial that were about as disparate as you can imagine. Some boys from Catholic school waiting for their bus to pick them up, an extremely fringe religious group called Black Hebrews, and some Native Americans finishing off their March for Indigenous Peoples Day. This is the most unlikely combination of people since Gogglebox had their screen tests. It sounds like the setup to a joke, really. It's a Catholic, a Jew, and a Native American walk into a bar and, how did these three groups of people end up together? Well, actually, when there are marches and rallies, and especially when there are two marches on the same day, strange stuff happens, and this is really strange. But it's basically served as a Rorschach test, an inkblot test. This random assortment of characters, and now we are supposed to read the meaning out of it. Tell me what you see. I see a group of Peruvian Marxists, some Nigerian florists, and a troupe of Morris dancers. And what do you take from all this? What does this symbolize to you? Well, this is everything that's wrong in American life. Really? Some Trump-supporting Catholics, a strange Hebrew cult that had been goading them for more than an hour, and then some drumming, marching Native American prayers who deliberately insert themselves into the fray? This is America?
This is America.
No, it's not. This event is just a freaky confluence of forces which before the advent of the smartphone would have left a handful of people saying that Friday night as their head hits the pillow, gee willikers, that was a dilly of a pickle this afternoon. But no, because of this technology and because of the real tribalism, which we're about to see, heads hit the pillow on Friday night with people fearing for their lives as death threats rained down. Now you can play the song.
This is America.
Yeah, this is the world right now. This is the real tribalism. Reza Aslan says the kid should be punched in the face. Punched in the face. And when more details came to light that set things in a different context, Reza Aslan doubled down on his violent speech and then tripled down on it in self-righteous zeal. Screenwriter Michael Green said, "No one need ever forgive this kid. For life, no one need ever forgive a boy who smiles at a drummer. Ever. Unforgivable." The Twitchfork mob piled on when a few seconds of a 2-hour-long video were clipped out by the media. And look, it wasn't just Twitter, it was respectable news outlets. Originally, the New York Times ran with boys in Make America Great Again hats mob native elder at Indigenous Peoples March. It spoke about a throng of cheering and jeering high school boys surrounding a Native American elder. That's not what happened, though. The Native Americans marched into the midst of a group of teenagers who were waiting for their bus, and they banged a drum in one boy's face. So, under pressure, the New York Times softened their headline to "Viral video shows boys in Make America Great Again hats surrounding Native elder." So still, they're talking about the boys surrounding the Native elder. But then they write a follow-up article, again under pressure from people who see what actually went on. The new headline read, "Fuller picture emerges of viral video of Native American man and Catholic students." The journalist writes, "Interviews and additional footage suggests that an explosive convergence of race, religion, and ideological beliefs against a national backdrop of political tension set the stage for the viral moment. Early video excerpts from the encounter obscured the larger context, inflaming outrage." No. What obscured the larger context was you viewing this Rorschach test and coming out with your own headline. And you do it again here. Against a national backdrop of political tension. No, that's your backdrop. You've inserted the backdrop. Why isn't it against the backdrop of a chilly January day? Why isn't it against the backdrop of a bunch of kids waiting to catch a bus? That was the context of the actual kids. The context you bring is the context you bring. The New York Times article continues. There were also those black men who identified themselves as Hebrew Israelites, preaching their beliefs and shouting racially combative comments at the Native Americans and the students, according to witnesses and video on social media. Yeah, racially combative? Yeah. They called them crackers, racists, bigots, faggots, and incest kids. They called one of the black students the N-word and said he should leave the school lest his organs be harvested. Yeah, I'd say that's racially combative. One of the members of the Native American March told the boys to go back to Europe using some pretty fruity language. Language that if the boys used of anyone else, you know it would be going viral. If that one kid's silence provoked such outrage, imagine the reaction if they'd said anything racially combative to anyone else. But the New York Times journalist is aware that some kind of equivalence needs to be established. The boys need to be seen to be equally guilty of racism, because racism is the only currency we deal in anymore. So, the article continues. For some, I mean, we don't know who are your sources, New York Times? For some, invoking the name of Mr. Trump, who has made inflammatory comments about Mexicans and Muslims, has become a racially charged taunt. Inspiration for hateful graffiti and high school sports cheers alike. So simply mentioning the name of the US president is a racially charged insult. Now they're trying to say that the school chants that these boys were chanting was actually about Trump. I mean, where's the evidence for that? Mr. Trump also recently mocked Senator Elizabeth Warren, whom he called Pocahontas, with a reference to Wounded Knee and Little Bighorn, sacred ground for Native Americans whose ancestors fought and died there. We're still waiting to hear what any of these teenagers actually did, and then we come across a phenomenal use of the passive voice. Note this. It did not go unnoticed that Friday's episode took place at the same location where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his most famous address calling for an end to racism in the United States. I love that. It did not go unnoticed. It's the journalistic equivalent of, hey guys, has anyone noticed? This is the same place that MLK gave that speech 50 years ago. Guys, have you noticed? Right? That's the background, people. That's the frame in which we must view all of this. You know, they've put two and two together and they've come up with racism. Racism squared. Racism to the nth degree. It is a Rorschach test. And what do they see? Racism. Racism everywhere. What was that kid meant to do? I mean, literally, what was he meant to do? He was singled out by a man banging a drum in his face. When an even more provocative older man was goading his friends, he called on them not to respond to the goading.
Why did you go back to Europe where you came from? This is not your own land. No, it's not. You've been here 2-3 generations compared to us. We've been here millions years. So get the out of my face with that shit. It's not. It's proven, man. Come on. It's proven. It is proven.
He actually comes across like a peacemaker, if you ask me. What was his crime? He smiled. What was he meant to do? I mean, the merest eyebrow raise could be and was interpreted as a sneer or as mockery. I mean, what could he do? What could he actually do? Could he dance along? You know that the media would cry cultural appropriation in a heartbeat if he danced along. What could he actually do? What did he actually do? You know what he did wrong? He wore that hat. Really? I mean, that's it. And I get it. You know, I am no fan of Donald Trump myself. I would not have voted for the man. I don't like the politics of making countries great again. In July, I saw a sign in Australia saying, "Make Australia great again," and I groaned audibly and nearly crashed the car. It made me angry. I don't like making countries great again. It seems to me like that kind of politics takes a traditional religious framework and applies it to a nation's history. So where the Bible talks about creation, fall, redemption, this kind of politics talks about the 1950s as the Garden of Eden, the 1960s as the fall, and redemption is yet to happen. But please vote for our messianic leader. Like, I don't like that. I don't like building walls. By the way, no one has found anyone saying build the wall in the 2 hours of footage that we have from the Lincoln Memorial. But look, I'm not into building walls. I'm an immigrant. I've been effectively deported from this country in the past. I've split my life across 2 hemispheres, and I am not in any way nationalistic. I don't like building walls. But this is a kid in a MAGA hat, and I don't hate him. Why do you hate him? It's not because of anything he did on Friday. Mahatma Gandhi could not have done much better, I don't think. You know why he's been so hated? He is a pro-Trump, pro-life Catholic. He got his politics and his religion wrong. He was marching against women's health. said Janie Haddad Tompkins. Well, he's either against women's health or he's against the slaughter of millions of innocent babies. You know, one or the other. But let's not let that stop the hatred, right? In fact, please let it stop the hatred. Do stop the hatred, please. I mean, you might hate the MAGA hat. I don't like it, but let this kid redeem it for you. Because there he stands, open-faced, smiling, pacifying in the midst of a mob, and this is the way of peace. If you don't like this kid's face, then look to the face of Jesus, who stood in a mob, turning the other cheek, allowing the condemnation to crash down on himself, and answering with peace. He answered with the smile of heaven. Recognize that you and I are the angry mob, and he is the open-faced, open-armed peacemaker. He is the hope for this fractured world. Because it is fractured. What does tribalism look like? The kids? The religious sect? The Native Americans marching? No. The media and the pitchfork mob and every politician who leverages that animus, they are the tribalists tearing us apart, encouraging violence and casting everything as a war. They are the ones building the wall. And everyone is paying. It's the 22nd of January. This is Speak Life, and you're watching the LIVEcast.
LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show. LIVEcast, LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, 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 welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody.
Yes.
Welcome to the LIVEcast.
Welcome, everybody. So that's...
Put that one to bed now. So that one's fine. Good.
Until someone finds a tweet of that kid
also,
from 3 years ago.
yeah, absolutely.
And then...
I would just hold my hands up and say I was the person who was charged with making that video. Mm-hmm. And for the one bit of bad language that slipped through, I missed that on the bit, so there's some bleeps. I'm sure you've all heard it before anyway, but some of you may not have wanted to have heard it, so apologies that I missed that one.
Yes.
Insert your own bleeps. No.
Yes, very, very sorry. The New York Times got through. And just for anyone who was triggered by that, sorry, cheap gag. And now I'm doing the whole tribalist thing.
Yeah, shocking. I wonder if anyone. So that story.
Yes.
Is I'm interested. I've just posted it on my Facebook page and said, what do people think about this story? And I just posted the BBC initial one about boys mocking, because that was the one I first saw. Yeah. And I saw it initially on Saturday morning or something, and I don't think I even read it. I just saw the picture, saw the headline, and was like, you know. Right. And I thought, like, he looked a bit smug in the photo. Right. I thought, I just kind of thought, that's terrible, isn't it? You know. Yeah. And then I just kind of moved on because I didn't think much of it.
You have a life.
Yeah, exactly. I've got other things to do. And then came in on Monday and you asked if I'd seen it. And I said, oh, yeah. And you asked what I'd seen about it. And I kind of said, well, I've not really looked at it much. And then I started to look at it and delved a bit deeper and found, there's a bit more of a story here. So there's some different sides going on. And so I posted it on my Facebook earlier. I'll be interested to see what people say. Because I don't think in the UK it's been as widely picked up, whereas in the States it seems to be like, it's gone far and wide.
Right. Right. But it makes a difference. Like, you know, if you're shown that picture, and it's interesting, you saw the kid smirking. Like, what did you think? He was just. Did you think he had a punchable face? Was that your first?
I think many people have. No. I mean, I don't particularly remember. I just thought, 'cause I saw the headline that was something about, mocking a thing, and I just kind of, I remember thinking, like, if that is the case, then that's terrible. Right. I mean, I don't think I particularly looked at the photo and thought, look, I'm looking into the face of evil right now, like, and quick, Becca, come and see this. I've never seen more deep evil than the eyes of this boy.
Oh man!
But I just kind of moved on from it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what people will say on my Facebook feed. Whether there'll be other people who just kind of read it, seen the headline, and said, "Oh yeah, this is terrible," and how people will react. Maybe if we say, "Oh, there might be something else going on here as well."
Just goes to show, like, the difference that context makes. Like, context is just absolutely huge. That, if you think, if you see a still image, like one of the first things I saw about it was there's a kid frozen in a rictus grin as the Native American beats the drum in his face, and I think that was because they watched it a still photography, a still photograph.
It doesn't move.
Like, he doesn't
unnatural.
He doesn't blink, not even blink.
But it was weird. I mean, because I just started watching and thinking, like, I'll just see what's going on, and saw some of the other bits, and people had taken footage of the Native American man speaking about what had happened, and they'd kind of put it next to the footage.
Right.
I think it was taken on the same camera that the kind of main photo ended up being taken from. But it was, you saw the footage from earlier on and how the boy's just kind of in the background smiling away and, with everyone else. And this guy does go up to him, and he's actually saying in his interview, like, as this footage is being displayed next to him,
yes,
oh yeah, and they came up to me and did this. And you're thinking, this is, I mean, looking at it going, well, that's just simply not what's going on here,
and
is
like
it?
CNN didn't correct it. And
No one said anything about it. And so my take on it is so from what I've seen, and I've seen numerous angles of footage from various phones, and I've watched the 1 hour 45 of the Black Israelites footage. I've admittedly skimmed through some bits to get to the sections. It seems that there were these... The boys had been in town for the March for Life.
Yes, they then went sightseeing.
Okay.
I think that's when they busted out some of their MAGA hats.
Sure. So they were waiting on the steps for the buses, my understanding. And this group, the Black Israelite Movement, were there. And it seems from what I've seen on the footage that the things they were saying are pretty horrific, very kind of vile, racist things. And at some stage, they engaged the boy. It's hard to tell whether at some point maybe the boys started saying to them, you shouldn't be saying these things, or whether they engaged the boys. It's a bit tricky to tell where it started. But some engagement occurs, and the boys start chanting.
Like their school chants that they would do at a football game.
It's their school chants to kind of cover up the hateful preaching.
Yeah.
And so whilst that's going on, then you see footage from the Black Israelite Movement of... it's on their footage. You see Nathan Phillips walking into the middle. So the group don't go to him. He walks right up between the two.
That's important.
Into the boys, stops in front of them, and eventually moves into them. And at some point within that, he then...
You mean that a pro-Trump mob surrounded the poor man? Isn't that what you mean?
Well, that's the thing, is I watched it, I just thought, this is so not at all what's going on. Yeah. And so, I mean, the thing, what were the boys doing when he came into the midst of them? People were saying they were disrespecting him, and again, you're seeing this footage of him saying, I always felt fearful, their angry faces, and you look round at all the faces around him, close up to him, they're all laughing and smiling. Now, are they taking the mick? They're jumping up and down. I think some of them, you hear them at some point say, like, I'm so confused, like, and what's going on? Like, because he walks up and into the middle of it. And I think initially some of them think, like, he's come to join them to drown out these guys. So they're all jumping in time with the drum and going, hey, and, maybe some of them being typical stupid teenage boys, and maybe they're doing something, they shouldn't be doing in terms of they're making some, Native American kind of gestures or things that they think, but they should be, whatever. And maybe that it's hard to tell though. There's certainly not a hate-filled mob.
Right.
They seem. I mean, and then initially, what seems to be is this guy with us becomes to what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
And eventually, it diffuses. Yeah. And the whole thing kind of, even after it kind of drifts away, and there's quite a lot more footage.
Yeah.
And it all drifts away, and no one really does anything about it. And it's only then later someone's gone, oh.
Yeah.
Let's take this one thing.
Yeah. And
blow it up. And interestingly, it was someone had found the photo that one of the women, it was a lady who'd said she'd been there, and she'd shared this photo with writing on it, and she'd put what had happened. And as you read it against the, the hate-filled mob, and they surrounded us, and they came up to us, daring us to get physical and stuff. And you go, the footage just does not show that at all.
No.
I mean, they don't even come up to you. You come up to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's hard to... The thing is, though, I know immediately, and probably not on Speak Live, but I imagine if other people were watching this, people would just go, typical white man, siding with
closing ranks with...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the footage,
you
got to say... I mean, I've no idea what really Nathan Phillips was attempting, really.
No,
in the midst of
no,
it. I mean,
no,
he's
we're
just
not gonna
diffusing the situation. So I don't know what he was doing.
We're not gonna
Clearly,
impute motives to him.
but the thing is, what happened was, as well, is that they were saying there was initial suggestions as well that the boys were here were some Trump supporters who are kind of goading a black kind of group, rights group.
Right.
But what was neglected to be mentioned that the Black Israelite movement are not a black rights group. They think that the blacks are the descendants of the people of Israel, and the only true chosen race.
Yeah.
And effectively, they're just black supremacists.
Who
are full of hateful racism,
massively,
and they were spewing hateful racism. And you see that. I mean, you mentioned it on there. They said about there was a black boy who was one of the students. They were saying, "You've got to get out.
Yeah.
They're going to harvest your organs."
Right. They called them crackers. They called the black
all
guy
these things, and they were saying, you say, in the States, in God we trust, it's on your bills, your dollar bills and all this, but yet you give gays rights. And you even hear one of the Catholic guys, he says the Bible so the black guy from the Black Israelite movement says, and the Bible condemns this, and one of the Catholic boys goes, but they're still people.
Right,
Like, you even hear that.
And they boo the homophobia.
They boo the
Black Israelites. They do.
Right. And so
you would think it would be the other way around from the way things were reported.
Yeah. So there were these two groups who seemingly were involved in something, and then Nathan Phillips comes into the middle of this as well as just kind of a third party. Yeah. It's just very bizarre.
I think if people are having trouble figuring out like the tone and the vibe of the place, you should just go to Speaker's Corner. Right. And you'll see, and there are black Israelites there at Speaker's Corner, and there are people from all sorts of different persuasions. You got your Marxists, and you got your Christian atheists, and you got your Jews and your Hindus and your Muslims and Christians and everyone, and then all sorts of political speeches going on. And like I used to go down there every Sunday because it's a real collecting place for nutters like me.
Yeah.
So I fit right in there, and it's just such a weird and some section of the crowd will sort of there'll be human spirits and they'll get up and they'll start singing a hymn, or someone else will start chanting Allahu Akbar or something, and it'll just go back and forth and nobody knows what's going on. And the number of times I've been at Speaker's Corner, or I marched against the Iraq War back in 2003, and you just think there were times when, like, in between speeches, we just like threw the frisbee around and just were laughing and joking and that kind of stuff. And you just wonder, well, like, if there was a smartphone there in your face, and maybe someone was saying something like on stage, and I was smiling.
Can you
like,
imagine?
what kind of monster are you? Like, if you take anything out of its frame and put it into a different frame, you can create a monster out of anyone. And here's proof of it. Here's a kid who's smiling. What else could he do?
Well, and people say, like, oh, what's he doing and why didn't he move? And and to be honest, I don't know why he didn't just step out of the way. But it was such an odd situation that, I mean, I imagine the thing is, if it felt from watching the footage that the guy had come up to him and really fixed him. With a bit of a stare and was right in his face. I think, well, what do you do? Like, because clearly the tension is on you now. You're like, do I step away? Like, what do I do? And people said he was kind of confrontational. And I mean, he does look at him for a very long time. Yeah. It's unusual. But actually, other footage shows there are points when he kind of looks down, he looks away, he even turns.
He turns and he tells his mates to back off a bit.
There's that, and he's looking around as well, but that's not really shown.
No.
But it's just
what that Simpsons episode where he's like giving the interview and then they hit pause on the tape, Mr. Simpson,
and the clock keeps moving in the background, so like the time changes. Mr. Simpson, don't take your anger out on me. Dramatization may not have happened.
That's what it was.
It was a bit like that,
That's what it was.
But there is a sense of, I don't know how old is he? Maybe 16, 15, 16, 17. Slightly kind of, what do I do in this situation?
Who would not be like that? Who would not be like that?
And I mean, if he just walked, I mean, someone said, I don't know why he didn't move out of the way, but then I don't know why Nathan Phillips didn't just
he was singled out.
Move around him anyway.
He was singled out.
Well, yeah.
Like he really was. So what else do you do but smile and then have death threats, rain down on your head?
And he can never be forgiven.
He can never be forgiven.
Because he
no. Oh yeah, wait.
Because he may be smirked. Thing is, even if he was smirking, even if he was smirking, Do we
Right.
really say something that he would have done as a 17-year-old boy is defining of him his life? It's fascinating last week, wasn't it, on the Russell Brand and Candace Owens thing, where she talks about the racial abuse she received when she was a teenager.
Yes.
And she talks about one of them being a 14-year-old boy, and she won't call him a racist. She's like, he was 14.
Right.
Like, is he a racist for his whole life?
Right.
But well, in society, yes.
Yeah.
But maybe in the church, we should be saying, well, no.
Yeah.
Well, we should be saying no.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
And it's just, and the number of tweeters who just imagined what it was like inside the head of this guy. There was one BuzzFeed journalist who was just
BuzzFeed
like,
and journalists probably don't go together, do they?
I know this guy. She was like, there was one of, let me read out. So, at Anne Helen. So here's a BuzzFeed journalist. She talks about the guy and she says, there was always one of them in every class. The guy who whispered to his friends when I lectured. The guy who snickered when his classmates answered questions. The guy who tried to turn serious class discussions into jokes. Of course, that guy was also the guy with the gumption to ask for extensions, to miss class and email saying, what did I miss? To plagiarize, to get a C and come to office hours and try to flirt his way to a better grade. The gall of his mediocrity never ceased to surprise me. And this is just like tweet number 4 in like this tirade. She's just imagining from a snapshot.
It's like all that. She's made this whole character.
And it's, you know, Miroslav Volf, and we should listen to Miroslav Volf because, you know, as a theologian who grew up in the Balkans and saw what really happens when this kind of tribalism is lit and turns violent. You know, in Exclusion and Embrace, he said, you know, the human tendency is always to exclude the other person from the community of humanity, and to exclude yourself from the community of sinners. That's what we're always trying to do. I'm not a sinner, and that guy's not human.
Yeah.
And you just see that, and like, how on earth are you getting into his head and coming up with this like caricature of some guy that you've seen a few seconds lifted out of context from?
We've had someone here, Jim Gawley, said, do you think it may cause people to give pause at all? You know, like to actually, I assume the question is saying, do you think this will make people stop and go, oh, well, my answer is no. Not at all. Because I've seen already in the people commenting on different parts of this, different videos and things. And it's obvious some people are commenting without having actually watched anything more than or done more than read the headline like I did initially.
Yeah.
And people are saying, have you seen this? And they're posting a bit more footage in a link or something. And clearly people aren't looking at it. And, you know, it reminds me of, I can't remember who it was, the people who did the article where they posted some outrageous headline, but with literally nothing in the body of the article. And everybody just went mental on social media, like commenting how terrible it was. But of course, and people going, now we know who's read the article and who hasn't, because it was just an empty article.
Wow.
But it was a bit, it reminds me as well, because people want to be, this is my concern, like, when other people say things, it's like, how many people have bothered to actually look into it?
Yeah.
So I feel like I have, because I've at least sat through some footage from different angles, and an hour and 45 footage is quite a long time to sit through.
Yeah.
I'm not going to claim I've got the whole scoop on it,
Right.
but I imagine there's lots of people who read the headlines, watched the tiny clip in the articles, and that was it, and have now proclaimed, you know, the final say. But it reminds me a bit. Did you see Newsnight the other night? Can't remember the guy's name now. But he got called on something, and they said, he was saying about this report, and they said, have you read the report? And they said to him, have you read it? And he was just absolutely, you could tell he'd not read this report at all. And he was saying all these things about the report, but he'd clearly not read it. And I mean, it was just painful to watch.
Define read.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of it.
Yeah.
You know, but
There's lots of books I think I've read, and then when I think back, actually, I never did. Yeah.
Yeah, and I worry that is... So I don't think it will cause people... But my biggest concern is not so much that it won't cause people to stop. That is obviously bad. But I think as Christians we should have a higher... We should be called to a higher kind of critique of these things, I suppose, whatever.
Right.
We should be interested in the truth.
Right.
Getting down to it, which is I'm always baffled when I see Christians posting, you know, various things, just silly things like, this is a notice to Facebook. I hereby let you know you do not have the right to do yada yada yada. And I'm like, this is a hoax. If copy and pasting these things into your status is not going to make any difference to anything,
Yes.
how have you fallen for this?
Yeah.
Take 2 seconds to Google this.
Yeah.
You know, everything is you
Yeah.
can Google.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Um,
This is like it seems like the Catholic diocese in Kentucky, where the school is, just threw them under the bus immediately, and sort of and the principal was like, well, everything up to expulsion is on the cards, and we'll see. And there were a lot of sort of Christians who wanted to come out and say, if and to condemn the boys for this apparent racism, and so the Christians, there was a kind of a Christian impulse that was sort of whatever is true about this, we're sorry and we repent. So that was good.
Yep.
But without the fact checking, actually, it's just throwing people under the bus.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's shocking to see people like Reza Aslan saying things. I just think why no one at that kind of level should be speaking about anyone in that kind of way. I mean, you should conduct yourself with a level of decorum.
Yeah.
You know, even if you find something completely awful, you've got to get above that kind of very carnal, just smash everyone type thinking.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, there was also a thing yesterday, I think, from Alyssa Milano had condemned it.
Had she?
And you just think like, and then I thought, well, why do I care? No, but why do we care why do we care which celebrities vote for Trump or don't vote for Trump? Like, why are we taking anything about situations like this from celebrities? I mean, literally people whose job is to dress up as other people and play make-believe and get filmed doing it. Yeah. And we're taking political advice from them. They're getting our thoughts from them. I just think we've gone a bit bonkers. But then, obviously people should take all their thoughts from us. It takes a whole weekend to unpack that one headline that went viral, and he and his family were doxxed, and life was made very difficult for them. Death threats came, it took nothing. It took nothing for anyone to pile on social media. And it happened quite recently, with the Gatwick drone.
Right.
Actually, the couple in Crawley who were kind of falsely accused. It turns out a lot of people in Crowborough, where I live, actually know them. Through work things, and a guy who actually works for someone who lives in Crowborough. Okay. And so it was all over the Crowborough kind of feeds.
Yeah.
And people were saying like it's not true, and it wasn't true.
And he was at work the whole time.
But exactly. They say he was at work with me, all these things.
Yeah.
But yet they'd been slandered all over the world, and addresses published and all that kind of stuff, and the media were like, oh yeah, it wasn't him.
Yeah.
Well, too late. You kind of destroyed.
Because we just love rushing to judgment. Absolutely love it, and we love to justify ourselves. And the cheapest way of justifying yourself, appearing righteous in the eyes of others, is to condemn someone else, right? Because you're better than them. So someone asked for the Miroslav Volf quote in full. This is from Exclusion and Embrace, and it's brilliant, really. He says, "Forgiveness flounders because I exclude the enemy from the community of humans, even as I exclude myself from the community of sinners. But no one can be in the presence of the God of the crucified Messiah for long without overcoming this double exclusion, without transposing the enemy from the sphere of the monstrous into the sphere of shared humanity, and herself from the sphere of proud innocence into the sphere of common sinfulness." So again, that's what we need, is the gospel, right? Like, with the gospel, I can't look at the enemy and not see actually someone in the same boat as me. And I can't look at myself without seeing a foul, racist, or bigot, or, whatever terrible, epithet you want to fling at somebody else. I can't look at myself without seeing a sinner, and I can't look at you without seeing a friend and brother, and that's because God the Righteous One took that condemnation on the cross, and like in the monologue, I didn't want to paint the kid as though he was Jesus or anything. Like, especially because no doubt they will find a tweet of his from 3 years ago that was unfortunate, and they'll take that out of context and they'll say, see, all this pushback and the defense of the kid, look what he's capable of. So I'm not trying to paint the kid as Jesus, but there is something about standing in a mob where condemnation is raining down, and you answer with a smile, and you answer with open-faced pacifism, you know, and okay, so take it out of the realm of there and just go to the cross and see there is the God who like came into a shame storm, and you know, and this kid he's starting to feel what it's like to be piled on, and I don't know psychologically how I'd cope if I had tens, hundreds of thousands of tweets against me and all sorts of horrible things. I don't know psychologically how he copes. But Jesus had the sins of the whole world just piled on top of him, and he really had done nothing wrong. And yet he would bear the shame in order to give us his peace. And it's only as we shape ourselves around that story that we're going to escape these shame storms here. Yeah. So, I don't know. What do we draw from this? What's the lesson, Paul?
There is no hope. It's all over.
It's all over, people. We're done for. Yeah. One outcome of it is very interesting. Like, if you now Google March for Life.
Oh yes, here we
show
go.
it. Show us. Let's
see
do
if I
this
can
live.
get this up here.
Let's see what this story has done.
Hopefully,
So,
you can still hear.
If you
us
don't know
here.
the context of the story, this was at the end of the March for Life, and the kids went off sightseeing and then got their bus home. So, but they were in Washington for the March for Life. So let's Google March for Life.
See what comes up for March
And
for Life.
see what comes up. Okay, top story. It's like tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of people marching for the rights of the unborn. The top stories are this.
So March for Life teens confrontation there, and then Ben Shapiro's been dropped.
Yeah, we'll get onto that in a second.
So March for Life teens confrontation with Native Americans. March
Yeah, reveals
what? Google won't tell me.
Man.
And then some Wikipedia entries. Interesting though that the highlighted things right at the top are the.
And then Pence, go down. There we go. Pence praises wife despite controversy. What on earth? What? and finally, you get We're Pro People. Rachel Campos Duffy visits DC March for Life.
Yep.
From Fox News. Okay, like you're getting down towards the bottom of the page. So, wow, well done everybody for absolutely obscuring what happened when perhaps hundreds of thousands of people were marching to defend the rights of the unborn. And the story about Ben Shapiro, if people don't know him, he's a Jewish podcaster among other things, and he's firmly pro-life, and he did one of his podcasts from the March for Life on Friday, and this is again all about context. He in answering common pro-choice arguments, he was answering the claim that abortion actually lowered the crime rate. Okay, it's in the book Freakonomics. And it seems to me like really ugly as a way you want to argue.
To clarify, that's a pro-choice argument.
That's a pro-choice argument
that came out in the 70s.
Right. So Roe versus Wade in 73, and then abortion rates go up, and then you can see that when the people who would have lived aren't there anymore, that actually the crime rate drops, and it's all based on because the minorities that commit crimes the most are also the minorities that are targeted in the womb.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so that should be the story. That's absolutely should be the story. And so Ben Shapiro, in unpicking that argument, then says it's like the killing baby Hitler arguments. You know, should you go back in time and kill baby Hitler?
Right.
And he said, well, if you knew that he was baby Hitler, maybe just take him out of the family where he was and put him in a good family, and he would no longer be Hitler, right? Which is what he said, and then that was snipped out. That 21 seconds was snipped out without any context, and baby Hitler became a trending hashtag. And the hatred and the scorn poured down on Ben Shapiro, who was actually unpicking a racist argument, if you ask me, and beyond racist, like really obnoxious and horrific. Like, let's reduce the crime rate by killing people more likely to offend.
Yeah. Because, we know, we can pinpoint exactly which of the babies were going to be criminals.
If we have the right precognitives.
Yes.
What was that film?
Minority Report.
Minority Report, yeah. That's all we need. Abortion is just basically Minority
Report
without the precogs. We don't
just
know, so we just better slaughter 42 million per year. That's what we better do that.
Profound.
So, but Ben Shapiro mentioning baby Hitler, that's the objectionable thing. And so 2 sponsors dropped Ben Shapiro, including the toothbrush manufacturer Quip, who had been supporting the Ben Shapiro show, And they released an announcement saying, following one of our ads being read in a venue we did not endorse, we have chosen to discontinue our advertising relationship with this show. Okay, fine. It's a free world, they can do that. But they said they did it to ensure all of our advertising partners are aligned with our oral health mission and values. You make toothpaste, people. It's toothpaste. It's like, yeah.
So if Shapiro had come out and been kind of very pro-choice, they would have felt that was furthering their oral crusade.
Maybe.
To help people's dental hygiene.
Maybe. It comes alongside, this week we also had the Gillette ads. We were going to go into the Gillette ad. That was going to be news. Do you remember that? These news cycles are so brief.
That's another thing I just saw and I was like, all right. No.
So Gillette, The Best a Man Can Be, was a film that was released just a few days ago. It was between now. It was in the last week.
Yeah, in the last week.
Because it hadn't dropped when we last had the livecast. I thought I was going to do my monologue about that, but we've so moved on. That's like days old
that's
now.
like 5 days ago.
It's totally gone now. But that was all about toxic masculinity, and Gillette is trying to align themselves with where people are at. And Procter & Gamble, the parent company, came out with a really chilling statement that said that actually they really want to be prominent in pushing for the rights of gays and blacks and lesbians and minorities and anyone they can. And they really want to politicize like hygiene products. Like they really want to. They think they know what the meaning of sex is or the meaning of gender is.
Yeah.
They've got that view, and they're going to use their platform to preach politics to us.
And the cynic in me, like,
which is quite a lot of you, Paul. Let's be honest.
Mostly not in me. It's just out here. It says, I really doubt someone at Gillette thought, you know what, toxic masculinity is a real problem, and I really think we can do something about this through our with our platform. I imagine what someone thought was, do you know what, this is a bandwagon we can jump on to make lots of dollars.
Right.
Yeah. And everyone's talking about it. Right. And I'm sure there'll be some people out there who are saying, like, I'm now going to buy Gillette razor. I'm sure there's plenty of people saying they're not going to do that.
It got a lot of views. It got 24 million views.
There you go.
In a few days.
I mean,
we should do that.
At the end of the day, I feel a bit about this. I could do about celebrities. Like, why do I care what a razor brand thinks about anything apart from razors? Quite frankly,
yeah,
like
completely.
To
be honest, Gillette have always been overblown about their competition.
Exactly.
Like, we have 37 blades. The first blade does nothing at all. The second blade does reconnaissance. The third blade does market research on the political views that people would find acceptable.
The thing is, I'm not even that interested in what they tell me about razor blades. Let alone what they tell me about how I should think. But that's
sell me the razor. Just sell me the razor.
I just like a shave.
Man, yeah.
The world's.
Bill Lavelle was right. He said
mad.
it's gone mad. Bill Lavelle says the Gillette ad itself wasn't bad, but the P&G statement was. I agree with that. I think it did stir up a lot of anger and hatred, that Gillette ad, and it had like 6-to-1 dislikes to likes for a few days, and there were lots of people who just hated it because how dare they tell men that sometimes they can get things wrong. And I'm here to tell you, sometimes men can get things wrong. But when someone accuses you of toxic masculinity, you could just say, yeah, but what about toxic femininity? And okay, right, sure.
Yep.
Or you could say, what about healthy masculinity? And you're like, yeah, okay, fine. There is healthy masculinity too. If there's toxic masculinity, there must be healthy masculinity, right? But then, surely a better response is to just own whatever is true about toxic masculinity, and there is lots to own about, men getting things wrong, and then try to live out healthy masculinity, whatever that is, rather than just point the finger at everybody else and feel better about yourself because somebody else is worse.
Thing is, and it's never going to happen now because the moment's passed. I would like to have seen the advert before I heard about it, in the sense of. So the first time I was aware of the advert was it posted with a kind of headline of Gillette takes down toxic masculinity or something, blah, blah, blah. Anti-men advert. And of course, then as soon as you're already going into it with stuff in there in your head about what this is about. Yeah. And when you're going with that, you can look at it and go, oh, yeah, it's totally just having a go at men. But the thing is, if you'd not had that context,
Yeah.
you would easily have just watched it and be like, yeah, men should be good
Men.
people. That would
Yeah,
be good,
yeah.
wouldn't it? Like, you know,
And buy more razors. Yeah.
buy more razors. Yeah. Again, Gillette. I mean, we don't care what you do,
Perfectly
really. So
fine.
Gillette, buy more razors, please.
Just make a decent razor. That's all we ask. That's really all you're called on to do. Make a decent razor. It's like Martin Luther when he was like, you know, what does vocation mean? Like he would talk about, like, people would say, well, how do I be a Christian cobbler? I'm a cobbler. How do I be a Christian cobbler? And he was like, you don't become a Christian cobbler by putting a cross on the sole of every shoe.
What?
He said, just do a good job, right?
Yeah,
And that's,
do a good
you
job.
know,
Yep.
but isn't it interesting that now razor manufacturers are more religious than Martin Luther, right?
Yeah.
Because they're putting their little signs on things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like religious people would just say, Gillette, you know how you can serve people and serve the community. Just make the best razor you can make. To the glory of God. That's fine. You don't need to preach at us. Even Christian razor producers, I don't need them to preach at people.
People would
either.
always say, don't they, like, well, can you know, keep your politics and your religion to yourself? That's what people's attitude is. But yet, somehow, when celebrities or companies do it, we're like, oh, yeah, we'll have some of that. Or,
Yeah, yeah. Be more cynical. That's the upshot of all this. So, you know, so to bring things back to the March for Life, right? So, isn't it interesting? It's the whole thing's been hijacked by all these shame storms and the Twitchfork mobs, so that you can't even find out what the March for Life is about. Not even when you Google it. Like usually you're like, okay, the mainstream media is not going to tell me, but at least I can find it on the internet. No, you can't actually. Like, it's buried. But we thought we'd take the opportunity of showing part of an interview that I did with Dave Brennan last week from Brefos. And Brefos is a pro-life charity that's really trying to get the church on board with defending the rights of the unborn. And I thought one of the most fruitful parts of the interview, and you can definitely go and check out the whole thing. It's on YouTube. It was on YouTube last night. It'll be on Facebook tonight. But one of the most helpful bits was I just asked him a few kind of devil's advocate questions. Can you give me some straightforward answers to some of these questions that pro-choicers will often ask about the topic? And I thought he gave some real wisdom. So let's have a look at Dave Brennan from Brefos. What would you say to let me sort of play devil's advocate and ask you questions that sometimes I'm asked. If there's a let's say a fertility clinic burning to the ground, and in one room there are, let's say, 100 frozen embryos, and in another room there's a toddler. And you can only go into one of those doors and save people from one of those two rooms. Isn't your instinct to save the toddler rather than save the 100 frozen embryos? Aren't you therefore basically implicitly saying that the unborn are not fully human?
Yeah. I mean, if I were to choose between saving my own mother and a whole Indian city,
wow,
for sentimental reasons,
yes,
I might choose my mother.
Yes,
and one, you know, people may not criticize me for saving my mother. People might acknowledge, you know, that's natural. That's, you know, that's your mum.
I understand the intuition.
Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, I'm not, the honest truth is I'm not sure what I would do in that situation. I would seek to save as much human life as possible. Obviously, you know, a toddler might have a better chance of surviving outside of the context of the clinic burning down than embryos. I don't know. But my answer to that question doesn't change who or what they are.
Yes.
Just as me saving my mum isn't because that Indian city isn't packed full of human beings.
Yes.
And so what we need to do is look at it objectively, because human rights is not circumstantial. Human rights is not attributed according to relationships, location, development. We hold that human rights are intrinsic, self-evident, they don't change. Your right to life is your right to life. And so, you know, anyone's response to that very artificial question has no bearing on when a human being becomes a human being. We need to approach that scientifically. As Christians, we need to approach it biblically.
on the biblical issue, what about when somebody says, okay, well, Thomas Aquinas, he was biblical, right? And he seemed to think that life sort of began at quickening, and that's like 6 weeks, is it? Something around there. And that some will say that the modern pro-life position is actually quite novel in the history of the church. Is who is right? Was Thomas Aquinas the blip, or are we the blip? What's going on?
I've had people put this to me, and the question I asked in response, they were saying, when does ensoulment happen? When does the soul arrive? And that surely is the point from which human life really matters. And my response was another question. I said, where in the Bible is there any suggestion that you can have a living human being without a soul? I don't think that's something the Bible can conceive of. Human beings have mind, body, soul. That's what a human being is. And we see that in even in Psalm 51. David goes as far back as conception. I was sinful from the moment my mother conceived me. Now, you need to be a person to be sinful.
Right.
You can't just be a bit of tissue or an organ. Or a person can be sinful. And David says he was sinful from conception. He was a person. He must have had a soul. So I think Psalm 51 challenges that very directly. But even if we didn't have Psalm 51, just this idea, because we know scientifically they're living human beings before that. We know that, in terms of their DNA is distinct from the mother, distinct from the father. All the information is captured at fertilization. From that moment, they're just developing. And at 6 weeks, you've already got a heartbeat. You've already got many of the organs. You've already got the brain waves are measurable. At that point, we know there's a human being in there. And I can't imagine where someone gets the idea you can have a human being without a soul in them.
Yes. Yep. So Aquinas is wrong.
Aquinas is wrong, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Or to put it more generously, we've got science now to show that quickening means coming alive. We've got evidence now of life from fertilization scientifically that he didn't have access to. And so I've not studied him in depth, but perhaps if he had access to the science we've got today, maybe it would be obvious to him too.
Okay, one more devil's advocate question. So there is this sort of moral dilemma, sometimes known as the sort of the violinist kind of objection. So imagine that it's a woman who wakes up, and somehow this violinist who has some kind of need for dialysis or some kind of need to be attached to her body, he is parasitic upon her, and she wakes up and she's now connected to him. If she removes him from herself, he will perish and die. Is she morally obligated to stay attached to him for, let's say, 9 months? What should she do? And could we ever blame her if she wanted to detach that violinist from her?
So it's a really great question, and analogies are fine. It doesn't have to be identical to be valid. The question is it an appropriate analogy? And a number of points, I think it's actually not. Firstly, if I was standing on the street and a child walked past me, someone else's kid, and walked around the corner and something bad happened to them, say they got hit by a car, people would not hold me accountable. Why? Because it's not my kid. That's just a stranger. However, if it was my own child, say it was a 3-year-old, and say I walked into a shop and just left my 3-year-old out there, because I only want to get something sorted, and I come back and she's been abducted, or something's happened to her, rightly I'd be held accountable.
That's negligence.
It's negligence. But it's negligence because it's my own child. And we all intuitively know, and there's a legal distinction between your obligations to your own child, your offspring, and your obligations to a stranger. And one way in which this analogy breaks down is, I don't know how people's sort of biology is, but this isn't where babies come from. They aren't randomly strapped to you overnight. They're your offspring. And that leads me on to, I guess, a second point, that there's a difference in relationship. Your own child, you have certain obligations, a duty of care, and we've established already that it's a living human being. They're already your child. You have a duty of care. But that leads on to another point, which is, where do babies come from? They don't come out of thin air. And yes, there is the very difficult, and thankfully, at least in this country, very rare comparatively case of rape, you know, where it is not the product of consensual sex, but the overwhelming majority is the product of consensual sex. That's where babies come from. And so it's not like this thing is just strapped to you against your will. Nothing you did to make that a possibility or a likelihood. Babies come from sex. And so it is a baby is a natural consequence of sex, which is overwhelmingly consensual in the cases which lead to abortion in this country. And that would lead again to another point, which is the womb is the natural environment for a baby to develop in. Now, the analogy you give me, the violinist, it's a very unnatural, very strange scenario, which, you know, in today's world, we can imagine it may be happening. You know, science has moved on to such an extent that, yeah, perhaps, you know, someone could keep someone else alive if they got a special blood type or whatever, and so on. So I'm not saying that couldn't exist. I'm saying it's not really what pregnancy is like.
Yes. Yeah.
That's artificial. Pregnancy is ever so natural. It's where we all came from. We all grew up in the earlier stages in that womb, the natural place. And so whilst the violinist story talks about an unnatural way to keep someone alive at personal cost, pregnancy is absolutely natural. And the unnatural thing to do is to break entry into the womb, the place of safety and development for the young.
Yeah, so that was part of the great wisdom of Dave Brennan, and do check out the whole video. It's up on YouTube and will be up on Facebook.
Be native on Facebook tonight at 7 o'clock.
Tonight. So yeah, I mean that violinist kind of analogy. Amy's just asked, why is he a violinist? Yeah, that's not integral to the analogy, but it is really helpful for remembering it. I think it was a masterstroke making it a violinist, like, because it becomes memorable at that point. But yeah, let's imagine some randomer might play the violin, and he attaches himself to you. Do you have any responsibility towards keeping this person alive for 9 months? Let's say, but to imagine that that's relevantly similar to your own offspring just goes to show that you absolutely have to abort the mother-child link mentally before you ever abort the child themselves. Like,
yeah, well, and and people talk about in that example, you have the choice to have had sex in the first place, and that's why
in the overwhelming majority,
in the large majority of cases, and which is why, I mean, I think maybe one of the things we can be stronger on as we think about abortion is that it's not simply we've got to stop abortion, but it's a symptom of a wider thing of the attitude to sex, isn't it?
Right.
Which has come at the fall in the 60s. You remember?
Yes. Yes.
But it has grown out of that. That now people don't have this thing in their heads that, oh, if I have sex, I might have a baby.
Yeah.
Or whether I'm a man or a woman, a baby might result from this.
Yeah.
People don't have that mental kind of connection so much.
Right. Right.
Since birth control and
right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
So
it's recreation now. Sex is just recreation. And what, children? What?
Yeah. But I mean, there's some. I think Ben Shapiro mentioned it, and there was another video where Jordan Peterson was being interviewed, and both of these women talk about like the freedom of having an abortion. For women to be fully free to live their lives, they need to be able to have abortions.
Yeah, which
just seems so twisted and wrong. Yeah.
So. Look, you might think on today's livecast we've kind of defended a MAGA hat wearing pro-Trumper who might have said build the wall but probably didn't. But we've defended that kid, and we've opposed a woman's right to choose. Are we just right-wing fanatics? Is that where we come from? And like personally, like I would say not so much. On borders, but let's push people to be consistent, because on borders, I really am for the sort of free flow of people. That's been my life. I've been back and forwards between Australia and this country for most of my life. I've been deported from here. I don't, particularly like immigration rules. I don't like the building of walls. I'm quite pro-immigration, actually. I don't hate those who have a different view, but I'm quite pro-immigration myself. But part of being pro-immigration is that I think we should nurture and provide a sanctuary for the weak and marginalized, right? So, just continue that train of thought. We should provide sanctuary, provision, and protection for those who want to seek refuge.
Yeah, and the problem is that it's so, it's so binary in like the States, particularly, is very much watch yourself there. For those listening on the podcast, that was just the studio collapsing around us. So.
Nothing to fear.
So in the States, it seems you're a Republican or a Democrat. But I don't think anyone. Well, I don't know, but. We just don't really fit neatly into those categories. Yeah. As you talk to people. So there are things that I look at that in the States and the Republican policies and go, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And or slightly more right, kind of political views. And I go, okay, yep. And then there are democratic things and more left ways of thinking. And I also go, yeah, that appears right to me as well.
Yeah.
So and part of it is we they see this kid with a Trump hat on.
Right.
And therefore, he is the enemy.
Right.
He is the one who is...
Or he's our boy and we've got to protect him.
Or he's
at
us,
all costs.
yeah. And it may well be that when you sit down and talk to people one-to-one, well, it's like Russell Brand was saying, the difference between the Trump supporter and the...
Yeah.
The...
Bernie supporter.
Is really so insignificant, really, on the spectrum. You'll probably find you sit down and agree on a lot of things. But actually, we don't do that. We throw hate on Twitter.
Yeah.
That's easier, isn't it, than... having a conversation. So
maybe it's not as simple as left and right. Maybe there's a way of looking up and getting a nuanced view on immigration and on abortion, and it seems to me if on immigration you don't like the idea of making someone get over a wall before you protect them and provide for them, then why do you make the unborn do that? Why it seems like the 6 inches of the birth canal is the wall, right? And on the other side of the wall, like, we don't want to know. We got to make people, leap over that wall, and then we'll provide provisional protection and sanctuary and refuge. It seems to me like if you're maybe more left leaning on immigration, maybe you could become more pro-life when it comes to the rights of the unborn. Just a thought to finish on.
So, great comment there from Cody, just saying, as American, I don't think many of those who promote the wall are against immigration. I mean, maybe some are for sure. But they just want control over the situation. An uncontrolled situation can be just as immoral, especially when we consider sex trafficking, which is very common along with the US southern border. I love the rational conversation, though, mates.
Yeah.
And aware that, in a sense, we have, like you said, are we just being right-wing, defending a MAGA boy? I'd like to hope that we're trying to be a bit more balanced.
Yeah.
That, because I feel that, like I said, there's things on both sides of these. It's almost as if everybody is different. We're all individuals, and we're more complex than simply being called a leftist or a rightist.
May just be the case, And maybe it's not that God is on our side, It's not that great line in Joshua 5 when Joshua's meeting the commander of the Lord's army, which is Jesus, by the way, the pre-incarnate Christ. And he says to the Lord, are you with us or are you with our enemies? And he says, no. Isn't that great? It's just perfect. It's the perfect response. Yeah, well done, Lord. But it's the perfect response. Are you with our enemies or are you with us? Yeah, Jesus like, no.
There you go.
There we go. Going to finish on a negative, people. The word from the Lord is no, but I think that gives hope to us all. Brilliant. So someone's just asked about the Andrew Wilson interview. Stay tuned next week. We have an interview with Andrew Wilson where I talk with him about his new book, Spirit and Sacrament, an invitation to eucharismatic worship. Eucharismatic. It's a neologism. It's a portmanteau. Do you see what he's done? Yeah. So I loved my chat with Andrew Wilson, and
he's always good value, Andrew. So
he's brilliant, and we got him in the studio as well, which is great because you get so much more back and forth with that. So stay tuned next week for that. But so Dave Brennan interview will go out tonight.
Yep, you can pick that up.
The monologue will go out soonish.
Some point this afternoon, hopefully.
This afternoon, before we've all forgotten.
Internet willing, yeah.
And do get sharing that around YouTube in particular, because it's the sort of thing where people fall down a YouTube hole and they might just make their way towards a video which has a bit of Christian content in it. So please do get sharing that. Like us and subscribe us on YouTube. Like the page on Facebook.
Yeah.
And stay tuned for the podcast on Friday.
Yes.
And if you do want to support us here at Speak Life, we really appreciate that. We live off your generosity. So you can go to speaklife.org.uk/give, and there's plenty of ways to give tax efficiently there too.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming along, and we'll see you all again next week.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Bye.
Take care all. Bye-bye.